I have personally now closed about 4. I have 1,500 officers in the field. My very quick instruction to them now is that any structure with a double story that is unstable should be shut down immediately.
Our default placement will be in public schools, but we shall give an opportunity to parents to make a decision. If they want to take their children to properly registered private schools, we shall allow them to do that.
Okay, so that's the Cabinet Secretary, Professor George Magoha, and his Principal Secretary, Dr. Oluoch Kipsang, and they are promising to continue with the crackdown to ensure schools that are not compliant are shut down. And just basically to say here that the size of a class is supposed to be between the dimensions of 8 meters by 7 meters. That is a standard classroom for primary schools, and the capacity is supposed to be maximum 50 pupils. In some of the schools that we have seen, they have more than that. In terms of toilets, we were looking at the Precious Talents top school, and they are saying that they have 800 pupils. 800 pupils would require about 29 washrooms, that is toilets. They had just 10, and of course they're supposed to be far away for the boys, and for the girls are supposed to be far away. But this is a school that has been in existence, certified by the ministry. Until now, the professor says that he has withdrawn that certificate, and it's up to them to do amendments and rectify. How many of such schools do you have in your respective counties, and how then can you assure parents of quality at private schools that they are having to pay for? We'll begin with you.
As I said, let this be a wake-up call. The tragedy in Kenya is we like reacting when things happen instead of, thinking of quality even when such emergencies occur. Because you will ask yourself, these schools were given permits by the same government that is asking them to close down immediately.
Right.
So I think we just need to streamline our operations as government, so that we are able to avoid and avert ourselves from these losses. That is my take.
So Speaker Kagushia, this crackdown, it's expected now to weed out schools that would appear to be flouting the regulations. Yet you have inspectors, what do you call them? The quality assurance standards officers in each and every education zone. Why are we now having to react when tragedy occurs?
First, our country is a country of extremes. You know, I was looking at this highly celebrated teacher, Mr. Tabichi, who is gracing all the global functions all over. Now he's going to France after coming from America, and he's talking about his education successes in Kenya, where we are again now discussing the other extreme on the negative side. We have these schools, and by the way, as we were looking at here, these schools, especially in the informal settlement, as Mheshimiwa would say, most of them are really not registered as schools. And that is why the issue of inspection is usually somewhere in between, because most of them are actually learning centers, akin to NGOs. They are community institutions where pupils are kind of assisted. They are in between a private school and a public school. Why? Because most of the parents in Nairobi are not able to access public schools, sometimes because of even securing space. I know for you to get space in some of the public schools in this city, first an interview has to be conducted 1 year before. And
public or private?
Public, of course, public, because most of the times they are quite full. And some of the other public schools are... Yet
a school like Ngong Forest has more capacity than the pupils it has already.
Yeah, you'll find like in such kind of a situation, that school has serious problems that will need to be addressed. Probably their performance, maybe the infrastructure and such. So most of the times in most of the schools, public schools in Nairobi, there is a problem of people getting a space in those schools. Number two, most of these parents again are not so well up that they can afford proper academies or private schools. You know, a proper private school really is a school with a school bus, is a school with a swimming pool, is a school with a nice field, it's a school where they do taekwondo, they do karate, they do biking. I mean, they do those kind of things. That's a proper private school in Nairobi. But most of these parents, again, also will not afford. So they go to these learning centers, which are akin to kind of NGOs, where they even get feeding programs from well-wishers or from donors. And so normally they will be paying per term something to do with 3,000 to 5,000, which will afford them probably the same kind of expense they would have paid in a public school. But now because they can't access it, then they go to these learning centers where they pay something not so much. And so you will find that these are not really private schools. And so that's why going through this process of inspection is usually a tricky bit. Because even when you go to do an inspection of a learning center, which is an NGO, a feeding center, for example, will not be the same requirements. Sometimes you will subject them to when you're doing a public school. And that's why probably you're not hearing the Waziri talking about the inspectors as much. That's why they're not very, very keen on that. Because they know they're somewhere in between.
Honorable Oluoch, I'm sure in Mathare constituency there are buildings that are considered unworthy and illegal. We've also had the CS saying that double-story buildings that are unstable will be closed. The Speaker has really well touched on the issue of this is something that a disaster that continues to happen. We're a country that sort of reacts when disaster happens. What is the permanent way forward? And I'm not just looking at schools. I'm thinking about buildings. We saw what happened in Huruma when that building collapsed. God forbid if another building also collapses due to human negligence. Someone signed on a document and that building was erected. What is the permanent way forward?
I think that our institutions need to do the job that they need to do. We have at the Ministry of Education level, of course, what you've called the quality assurance people. We need to have a system where we inspect our schools regularly and subject them to continuous evaluation and not wait for disasters to happen. At the public schools level, I mean at the county level, I know that you have structural engineers, you have quantity surveyors, you have clerks of works, you have all these people who have to go through inspecting and ensuring that, I know, for example, if I'm doing a CDF class, they will do the foundation, and the quantity surveyor would have to come and look at what it is, the quotient, the portions and the quantities. You don't have a situation like the way the Precious School, where you're being told, and some you're there, I don't know if it is true, materials that were recycled. I don't know how you recycle materials that would put up a 3-4-story building. That's a time bomb waiting to happen. I think we need to have a situation where the standards that are subjected to building of public schools, where you don't get paid until the quantity surveyor and the clerks of works are comfortable what has happened before you go to the next stage. The same needs to apply to the private schools, and he has captured it very well. I think there is a gap. We concentrate too much on putting quality assurance, and I doubt that you will have situations where your public schools are collapsing because of the stringent nature of the conditions that they put.
All right.
Having said that, I think we need to look at also informal settlements. And informal settlements, I'll speak for Mathare constituency, there is that little lacuna where the minister really isn't going into. I have, for example, 150,000 students not in public schools and not in private schools. They are in informal schools, which is Sunday, it's a church, and then Monday to Friday, it is a school. And then they don't inspect this for good reason, because this is a church. So these people don't get planned for in terms of school infrastructure, certainly not from the National Assembly. They don't get TSC accredited teachers. They don't get school capitation. And then you're talking about standards. The same people who are supposed to transit 100% transition into secondary school. I think we need to get to the level where, as Parliament, as a Ministry of Education, we need to go and dust that. I think it was Mutula Kilonzo Senior, during his time as Ministry of Education. There was an update policy, and there is a word update, which is called Alternative Basic Education Training Centers in informal settlements. I think they tried to put it into the basic education regulations, but I think more needs to be done in terms of mapping how many such schools exist in the country, so that we map them in terms of numbers. We talk about their recognition, registration, because they cannot get to the standards it's talking about of the other schools. What is the middle ground? What is the bare minimum? What period do we give them? When you start an informal school in a church, within 1 year you need to have transited to stage B and C, otherwise we will shut you down. I think all that process needs to be harmonized so that that update policy becomes concretized in our basic education regulations, and then we need to start, I think, putting twice, if not 3 times the amount of budget we are putting into our school infrastructure, and we must extend them, I think, to these informal schools.
Okay, all right. I want us now to take a look at what's happening.
Just to emphasize on that. That gap that exists, if we don't come up with policy frameworks that would address that problem of the pupils who are not actually budgeted and planned for by the government, then we'll be left to have knee-jerk reactions all the time to these kind of problems. Because really there is a gap.
All right.
There is a gap.
According to the Ministry of Education officials, is that by 30th of October, they'll have gotten to take stock of all the schools that are risky and closed some, and of course advised what it's supposed to happen for pupils who have been affected by the closure of schools. So